Why are we here? Well, all right, fine. I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the Silent Hill 2 Remake Roundtable. We got Pim's Crypt, we got HotCyder, we got Sputnik 34, and myself, Kevin from Pixelit. We're here to talk about the Silent Hill 2 Remake. Thoughts, feelings, impressions, James Sunderland's music playlist, possibly who he voted for, his movie tastes. All of these things may come up over the course of this roundtable. But first, I want everybody to introduce themselves, starting from my camera right. Pim, go ahead. Who are you, and what would you say you're doing here?
Yes, what am I doing here? That's the question. What are we all doing here? Okay, so my name is Pim. I run the YouTube channel Pim's Crypt. I just like a couple of days ago released a video, an hour-long video on both the original Silent Hill and the Silent Hill 2 remake, and more importantly about the discourse surrounding both. And we might get into that later, probably. I'm assuming
we'll get there.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
Silent Hill 2 has been, or rather the Silent Hill franchise as a whole has meant a lot to me for years at this point. I played, I think Silent Hill 2 was my first one, and that was around 2007 or 2008. I was either 13 or 14 years old. I don't know if that makes me the youngest member of this roundtable.
Yeah,
it does. Okay,
I think so. By default,
yeah. I'm 30 years old now, if that helps. But yeah. So like this franchise has been with me for a long time and piqued my interest in regards to psychological horror in video games. So yeah.
All right, Jimmy James from HotCyder, the HotCyder. What's up?
What's up? Well, I mean, I think I'm the person who technically made this podcast. Well, I mean, technically you're the person making this podcast happen now, but I think I was the person who threw out the suggestion of, oh, we should have a discussion or like a podcast of some sort talking about the Silent Hill 2 remake when it comes out. So quickly, hello. I'm James. I'm from the channel HotCyder, where I cover video games and the like. My most recent video isn't about the Silent Hill 2 remake. It's actually about a bunch of demos that were out at Steam Next Fest during October. They weren't very Halloween themed either, so really messed up on that topic. But in regards to my relationship with the Silent Hill franchise, I had never played like any of the original ones. Like, I did not have a PS2 until really late in its life cycle, and at that point it was all kind of stuff like just all the greatest hits stuff, like Snake Eater and San Andreas and stuff like that. The one Silent Hill game that I had played before the remake was, funnily enough, Shattered Memories on the Wii, which I know is like an odd remake of the first one, but they kind of do their own thing. And if anything, that game didn't really make me a fan of Silent Hill so much as it made me a fan of the writer of it, Sam Barlow, who obviously went on to do his story and Immortality. But I've always had this kind of like interest in sort of past. I'm into obviously games history, and well, I think everybody here is obviously, but like I've always known of Silent Hill 2 kind of as this sort of almost like in the world of Control, it's an object of power. You know, everybody kind of gravitates towards it, and it kind of creates, different. It bends reality to its will, and so like I think everybody kind of knows about the game to the extent of like, you know all the beats of it, you know why it's good and stuff like that, and then obviously making a lot of thumbnails for people over the years, you kind of pick up why all the sort of important iconography from that game as well. So when the remake was announced, I did kind of have an interest with it, and I guess maybe I'll save a few of these points for when we get to them, but also just kind of the initial reaction around it as well. Kind of the adversary against it kind of made me a bit of a contrarian of being interested in it from that angle. And so when it finally came out, I decided to give it a go. I definitely have thoughts on it, but I'm still not quite sure if I am a Silent Hill fan, but we'll see how I feel at the end of this podcast.
We'll circle back
Yes.
around to that. Sputnik, what's up? I know you're the Silent Hill. I mean, Pim made the video, but I know Silent Hill 2 is. I think I'm quoting you correctly when I say it is the most important piece of media in your life. Was that the?
No, the quote is, "It's the most meaningful piece of art in my meaningless life."
Okay, there we
go. My story is actually quite similar to Pim. For the record, I do YouTube as well. I cover games mostly, but I do movies and music sometimes. But I played Silent Hill 2 when I was like 13. I remember distinctly, like, my mom would take my brother to an art class during the summer. So I had the house to myself for about like an hour and a half every morning. And I would play it during those breaks. And I got to like just fully invest myself in that game. And it was the first time a game blew my mind through its story. The Silent Hill 2 has changed and shaped the way I look at art, interpret art, engage with art. It's the most meaningful thing in my meaningless life. I don't know how else to put it.
It's beautiful.
It's been there when I needed it most, and sometimes when I probably didn't, but it was still there.
Nice. All right. So with the introductions mostly out of the way, actually, I should introduce myself. My name is Kevin. I run the podcast called Pixel Lit, where we read, recap, and review video game novelizations. I haven't actually looked into. I'm pretty sure there's some sort of Silent Hill tie-in that we haven't.
There is, yeah.
There is. We have not gotten there yet, but I assure you, we will. So we read these books so that you don't have to.
Like you're the nostalgia critics of video game novelization.
We all heard the song.
I could not help myself. I knew we all heard it. I cannot stop myself.
So, and my experience with Silent Hill as a franchise, never really played it. I made a joke months ago that I was a Resident Evil kid. I was already several games deep into Resident Evil. Silent Hill 1 came out in 98 or 99 or something like that. 99. We were already 3 games into the Resident Evil series. And Silent Hill 2 comes out in 2001, which that was my junior year of high school. Actually senior year of high school, depending on when it came out in the year. So I don't know, just never really clicked into my gamosphere. And before the remake came out, about a month before the remake came out, I finally played the original through the enhanced edition, which you, dear listener, can go to myabandonware.com right now, grab yourself a copy of Silent Hill 2, grab the patch for enhanced edition. Go ahead and do it. It's worth it. 4K. Up-res all the textures. It looks beautiful. Runs at 4K, 60 frames a second. It's a nice experience. And if you are on the fence, I recommend going and doing that first before you play the remake, because I think there's some metatextual stuff about the remake that makes it more of a
meta sequel, as I like
meta
to call
sequel,
it.
a re-sequel, or a meta sequel, kind of the way they started going with Final Fantasy VII, and then apparently dropped it in the second part of Final Fantasy VII.
Really?
From what I know, in the second Final Fantasy VII remake,
Kevin, that's another podcast that we would.
It's another podcast. It's another podcast.
Have to save a few hours onto that.
Meta sequels are a thing now. They exist, and we are all.
I was going to say, could I actually quickly amend something onto my introduction as well of why I suggested we do a podcast about this as well, and kind of the names we threw forward, which is the fact of, so I hadn't played the original, and my thought was what would kind of like, but I was sort of on the fence of whether I wanted to play the remake, and my thought was, rather than following the suggestion that everybody told me, and Kevin, that you had done of, I'm going to play the original first and then play the sequel. The remake. So I have kind of a better idea of the contrast. I had the weirder thought of what if I only just play the remake, and that is completely my, so that is my my onboarding into the world of Silent Hill 2. After playing it, and again, I guess we'll go into thoughts after that, our thoughts on it, but I kind of felt like I did need a little bit of, not so much context, but maybe kind of closure on my experience with the 2 remake. So I also played Enhanced Edition a few days afterwards. So I played the remake first and then played the original. But as I said, I kind of already came into it with this weird sort of cultural osmosis around Silent Hill 2 anyways. But
yeah. So why don't we get right into it? Let's just go around the round table and discuss a condensed version, because I know everybody on here is an essayist, and I have been known to just talk off the cuff for literal hours. So condensed version of what your thoughts were of the remake, your thoughts, your feelings. Pim, go right ahead. I know you already had your video out on it, but just the TLDR of your video, basically.
Right. So, as many people were, I was definitely skeptical of how the remake was going to turn out, based on the, for those who don't know, who are listening, the developers behind the remake are Bloober Team, who are famous, or rather infamous, for having universally been agreed upon to be quite bad at depicting topics regarding mental health issues. So when the game was announced, was it 2 years ago, or was it even further back?
It wasn't very long between when it was announced and when it came out, which is
right. It just feels like it was ages ago.
Yeah,
it really does.
So I was right there with a whole bunch of people of being skeptical, and I did kind of jump the gun occasionally and criticized Bloober for a game they hadn't even released yet. But as we got closer to the release date, I started feeling like I didn't want to be part of that, what I say in my video as well. I think it's a toxic discourse. I just wanted to step away from that and just have an open mind and be like, okay, if it's bad, or if I find it to be bad, then so be it. The original still exists and I still enjoy that. If it's good, well, yay, good for me. And I went out of that experience really liking it. I think the issues that I have with the original game are still very much present in the remake, considering that Bloober Team, they clearly have a reverence for the original material, and they didn't want to change too much of it. Maybe also because they thought that people will go berserk if they changed too much, which they probably would have. So the major changes they made was to the gameplay, and I am a big defender of the clunkiness of the original game, the combat being somewhat clunky, regardless if you're doing melee combat or even firearm-based combat. It's still quite clunky, and I think that adds to the entire vibe of it. However, I can't deny that I really enjoy the combat of the remake, and just how frantic it is, how satisfying it is when you finally get to defeat an enemy. Because just a singular enemy can be a big hurdle to overcome. I've started replaying the remake very recently, just a couple of days ago, and I'm currently in the hospital portion of the game, and just started fighting the nurses, and having 2 nurses in the same room fighting you at the same time, that's a struggle.
It's a death sentence.
The nurses are
because they will counter
tanky.
Your melee.
They'll counter you, and they are tanky AF.
Yes, and I mean it's obvious that you're supposed to use specific tactics and specific weapons for specific enemies. So when you use the shotgun against the nurses, because the shotgun is introduced in the same part of the game as the nurses, so it's quite obvious that you're supposed to blast them with this with this particular gun, but ammo for that gun is scarce, so you might not be able to do that every time, and you do feel way more powerless when you have to like hit them with a stick instead, or with a pipe in particular. So I do think that the changes they made to the gameplay overall, I have some gripes with the gameplay changes that they made, but overall I think they made some really interesting changes that makes for a very interesting alternate way of experiencing the same material.
Yeah. And now for something completely different.
Well,
James.
I was going to say, could I?
You want to go last on this one?
Could I hear Spot's points?
Yeah, Spot.
First?
I was going to think. Yeah.
I'm that's all
Spot,
I'll say for now.
Yeah, Spot, go ahead and kind of outline your thoughts.
I will try to make this brief.
You know what? It's not like we have a time limit, so
I guess so. Wow. So I don't want to say that I was never skeptical, because I mean, it's the fucking Silent Hill 2 remake. It's gonna be like a big what if, But I always had faith, because Bloober clearly loved that game, and they've been making Silent Hill 2 basically their entire career, right?
Yeah.
So like them getting the Silent Hill 2 remake was like, okay, they know how crucial this is. They can't mess this up. If they do, the studio's over. Like, so I always believed. And as more stuff came out, I was like, okay, this is looking good. And then I got it. And, it's simultaneously the most vindicating game release of my entire life. And it's also the most emotionally confusing one that I've ever had. I'm getting into that point in the video that I'm working on, but that part's really difficult to do. But, it's a lot to take in. I love so much about what they did with the mechanics of that game. The Silent Hill 2 remake reminded Silent Hill 2 that it's a survival horror game. And that's one of my favorite things about the remake. It's like the original game, you have 1,000 bullets, 1,000 all the time. And you have 1,000,000 health drinks. And then the Silent Hill 2 remake comes along. It's like, oh, you have 6 bullets and you have 2 health drinks. And you're like, there are 7 nurses in this room. You're like, okay. It's mechanically, it's everything I wanted. Mostly, I'm still bummed that the town exploration was really like hindered as the game went on. I really wanted more of that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the first 2 hours, I was like, this is everything I wanted. I wanted to explore so much of this town, and then I'm finally get to doing it. And then like you leave the apartments, and like there's like 2 buildings I think optional, and then you leave the hospital. I think there's maybe 1, and then you just go to the hotel and it's over. Mechanically, it's everything I wanted practically. Storyline wise, it's practically 1-to-1, couple tweaks here and there. There are definitely things about the remake that I'm not super big on, but like they're basically nitpicks. I loved it.
Good. Now, James.
Let's go.
I knew this was going to be a difficult podcast, because obviously it's kind of working from people who have kind of sat more with Silent Hill 2 as well, just as a game and as concepts and whatever. And obviously this isn't meant to be like this isn't a battle of wits or anything like that. It's people expressing their
It's
own
a battle of ideas.
We are. This is the marketplace of ideas.
And I have Dave Rubin waiting to hop on the call.
Jesus.
Little known fact, he's a huge Silent Hill fan.
No, I only played Born from a Wish, so
Oh my god,
The only thing he played.
yeah, I played
I played
the HD collection with the Comic Sans. Yeah. So I will go with so it's just initially, I didn't particularly love the remake, and it's one of those things that my opinion on it has kind of like settled down a lot the further I've gotten away from it, to the extent of when I finished it initially, I did feel a bit like I don't quite understand where the kind of positivity has come from this, versus now where it's and especially after playing the original, it's kind of a bit more like, I think it's just more my taste maybe weren't quite compatible with this, versus I can understand actually why this is like a strong product, because I think I will echo the points that have been brought up so far, which is in terms of presentation, I think it is an obvious improvement over the original, to the fact of obviously it's been done to kind of a modern standard. Like, I think the visuals look good. The character performances especially, I think, are really, and I think for a game like this, which is so about character interactions, I think is like incredibly well done. But I think, to speak to Spot's point, this has been basically Bloober's entire career has been a portfolio that they have put together to basically say, put us in, coach, let us remake Silent Hill 2. And I think with that does come with a bit of a interesting thing of, like, there's points of it where they absolutely did not want to touch it in regards to its plot and how stuff plays out, which I especially feel today as as games have kind of moved on and have evolved. There are places that Silent Hill 2 could have been improved, and I'm surprised that the remake didn't use the opportunity to do such a thing, but obviously we can get into that in a bit more detail afterwards. But I would say my big point of disagreement with the rest of the group is the kind of the mechanical side of it. Before playing it, I saw the previews and everybody kind of said, well, they are following after the Resident Evil 2 remake in regards to how they want to do a mechanical approach to this. In my head, I was like, well, I love the Resident Evil 2 remake, so just kind of stapling that onto something else makes perfect sense. And I think as well, following in the wake of Alan Wake 2 last year, which funnily enough is another game that I initially started after I beat it, I was very cold on it, but have only since kind of grown an appreciation of what it was actually doing. I still kind of hold that the gameplay side of that isn't its strongest point versus everything else. I think as a experience, the actual experience of playing Silent Hill 2 Remake was a very kind of bitter experience for me. I found its navigation incredibly frustrating, which arguably that could be something that on reflection we will do the same like we did with the original Silent Hill 2, where we said, well, the flaws in its kind of combat and navigation or whatever actually adds to the experience. I don't know if I would quite make the same argument. Like, this almost feels like that there was a better solution in place. Maybe they didn't quite follow after, but that's just sort of my opinion on that. And the fact that it is more combat heavy, I think really kind of neutered and sort of it. The way that I would analogize it, and I know this is really contentious, but the way that I thought about it, and this will be my final point on this, is that the Silent Hill 2 remake to me is like the film adaptation of Watchmen, where what's his face, Zack Snyder, in an interview said,
kind of see what you mean with that, honestly.
This is text for text, we are recreating frame for frame, but there's something in the motions and in the tone that they're not quite right. And there's obviously the argument that you can make of, like, well, Watchmen was obviously written for comics, the way that is told, and the fact that you take all panels into account when you're reading it is more important. And you could argue the same as that Silent Hill 2 was so built around the mechanics and structure of being an old RE1 style adventure game that you can only really tell a story like that through that, which is why I go back to, I am surprised with the remake, and maybe, obviously we can always come up with a better game in our heads, which they didn't make, but I do think with such a fundamental change to the mechanics, the story could have followed with that. And because it didn't, I was just kind of felt a bit, my final experience of playing Silent Hill 2 Remake left me with the experience of Silent Hill 2 going, oh, is that what people have been boasting about for so many years? And
it's interesting.
Yeah. What about you though, Kevin?
So I don't know if I want to say I'm in between James and Pim, or James and Sput. So I was the initial impression I got off of the remake after it had and so I'm just coming off the original. Like, I played the original for the first time, then rolled into the remake. I was like, oh, this is padded to hell. Like, that was my initial impression. Like, when I got to the town, I was like the Neely's bar stuff has taken me I gotta fucking go down the street and get the thing, and then I gotta go to like and be like, there's another apartment building before the apartment building, and I gotta do I was like, am I losing my mind? Did I do this in the original? And I had to go back and watch it. Like, no, I would have already been in the Woodside Apartments by now. So I think I was really low on it after the first like 2 hours. I kind of got into the rhythm and started really enjoying it. And I think once I caught up to the mechanics of how it wanted me to play, I liked it better, because in the original, I felt like 90% of the time I just didn't engage with combat. I was just like, James had a nice little jaunty sprint, and I was just like, doot. And I was just people, like, yeah. I just like do a little juke and then keep running down the hallway. Whereas combat is less optional in this one. So it took me a little bit to unlearn the fact that, yes, these combat obstacles are more, it's more likely you're going to have to engage at some point rather than just constantly ducking and diving. Overall, though, I liked it, but it's not going to be top of my game of the year list, that's for sure. But I did enjoy my time with it, and I'm enjoying slowly playing through it again with the chainsaw. So
Could I ask a question of Pim? Because you played the Alone in the Dark remake that came out earlier in the year.
Right, yes.
Oh, I also played that.
Oh, okay. I can ask this of both of you. What do you think in regards to which do you think was the more kind of interesting, like positive kind of approach to doing a remake of a survival horror game between Silent Hill 2 remake and the Alone in the Dark reboot?
I love that question. And I have to say that, like, I do think that, like, I think overall I might... No, I can't say this definitely, because this is going to change, like, tomorrow. Like, this is...
No, of course.
Yeah. But I think that, like, maybe it's just, like, the comfort of the Silent Hill 2 remake that makes it, like, speak to me a bit more just in this moment.
Sure.
But I do think that the Alone in the Dark remake is more interesting, since it makes all these huge changes to the original material, both in terms of gameplay, like camera perspective and combat and just the story in general. That's the kind of remake that I wish we would get more of in video games, because there's this interesting dynamic between remakes of films and video games, where like the one of the best examples is Gus Van Sant's Psycho remake, where people were like, this is just shot for shot, or Watchmen, as we mentioned before, like, this is just shot for shot. I mean, obviously Zack Snyder did make some like changes, as like mostly relating to like action, which I think makes it a good comparison with the Silent Hill 2 remake, actually. But so when it comes to films, people want the remakes to differ more, whereas with video games, I feel like people mostly want the game to feel as samey as possible.
Sure.
But that's not necessarily the most interesting remake you could make, because if you want to stick as closely to the source material as possible in terms of both gameplay and narrative, then, well, why not just do a remaster?
I agree.
And I mean, I still appreciate the Silent Hill 2 remake, and I still like it a lot, but like, when you compare these two specifically, I do think that, like, the Alone in the Dark remake is more interesting. I wouldn't necessarily say that it is the better game in my eyes, but it is certainly what I would want to see more of when it comes to remakes in video games.
I liked the Alone in the Dark remake. I think it's a shame it didn't get great reviews, and I believe the studio got closed down not long after.
Very well.
Didn't perform very well and all that. Still, it was one of the first games I played on the 2024 calendar of games. One of the first games I played this year, and
same.
It was fun. There's some missed opportunities in that Alone in the Dark remake. It kind of hints at a Resident Evil 2 style zapping system that actually never is implemented, because you have two main characters and there is no B story. It's when you play it the first time, you're playing it and you're thinking that there is going to be a B story with the other main character, and there isn't. When you choose it, you get the same story regardless of which character you choose, just with some different cutscenes regarding their personal issues.
Yeah, one specific chapter as well.
Exactly. So yeah, that was kind of it. But yeah, I will agree that it's to liken to another movie. It's Ocean's 11, right? You take, I think in film, a lot of people are more interested in seeing like, okay, that was a cool concept. Can somebody else just like take another crack at it?
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned the Ghost Van Sant Psycho remake, because I think like because when I was playing, and I will say this as well, actually. So I think the reason that my opinion on Silent Hill 2 remake has softened quite a bit is because it's something I don't feel a lot of people talk about when they talk about game stuff, apart from people who cover horror games. Because I think the actual atmosphere of where you play horror games, I think, is so important in regards to when people tell you to turn off the lights, put in your headphones, stuff like that. It does create a cool, isolating experience, which it is you in the game in that respect.
Right.
But I played the Silent Hill 2 remake initially in a Discord call because people were interested in knowing, what does this game look like? I want to see it. Now, Spot, your fall in the face is going to get even wider in a moment, because it was probably the worst call you could have been in. And obviously, I'm not going to mention names or whatever. And if they listen to this podcast, I do apologize, because I don't want this to make it sound like,
blame it all on them.
Or anything.
Blame it all on them.
It was Snake's fault, wasn't it?
The call was very much split between people who had no genuine interest in Silent Hill 2 whatsoever, and people who were very into Silent Hill, but incredibly negative about the remake, even before it came out. And it kind of felt in some instances that they were looking for anything that could justify the remake being bad. I was in the section where it's just after you meet Maria for the first time, and you go to I think it's after the apartments or something, but you go to a motel, and there's the 0451 thing in there. But there's also the bit where she, there's the callback to her finding the old dress that she wore in the original and going, hey, what do you think if I wore this? But then that turns into kind of like an action chase section, which obviously isn't in the original. They were watching that and all the way through complained about it, going, why is Silent Hill 2 doing this? Why is this why are they going into these as this? And the people who had no idea about Silent Hill 2, the only kind of sort of basis that they had was more about the RE2 remake, of going, well, I've played that game. This game kind of looks like it's trying to do a poor imitation of that. So I will say that playing the game and sort of having those voices in my ear maybe did kind of influence a tiny bit. I would probably want to go back and replay it a little bit. And I think replaying it would certainly fix my frustrations that I had with the initial navigation stuff of, again, being in a call and playing it, and without having a walkthrough to sort of point me in the right direction. Especially Blue Creek Apartments, I was there for hours trying to figure out what, and it was literally because I was missing certain rooms that I hadn't gone to. Even using the map to kind of ground myself a little bit, which is funny when you when I then played the original, where I never really had that issue. And I don't want to say it's because I've already done it in the remake. I think placing yourself in the world in the original versions are done a lot, which is funny considering the fact that it's an old, quote, old-fashioned style RE game. But then, and I guess this is more to people at home as well, which is that if you've been on the fence about playing the original because you're worried it's tank controls, Silent Hill 2 doesn't actually, if you want, you don't have to play it with tank controls, which goes a very long way to fixing the main frustrations with it. But yeah, it was a really, I think is to speak to your point, Pim, of saying that initial kind of negative response that the game was getting because of Bloober Team's involvement, I think did very much kind of create this interesting basis of both people to be wowed by the fact that they did manage to pull it off, but also, again, kind of gave people the ammunition of, well, I don't really want this to be good. I want to find like examples that will be the case.
And I think that plays in a lot with the way I start off my Silent Hill 2 video is just quoting Justin Leeper, who used to write for Game Informer, where he got at this exact instant, I don't remember exactly what he said, but there was some harsh criticism thrown against the game anyway. And I actually reached out to Leeper for this video, and I was very surprised to actually get a reply. And he admitted that, like, I mean, my opinion on the game hasn't changed that much since back then, but I did replay it later in a setting that was more conducive to, like, you know, just
he wasn't pressed to do a review of the game after cramming it for publication, you know?
Right. And I think similarly, I do think a lot of people will play the remake with all of this discourse. Like in the case of you, James, you heard literal voices in your head while you were playing, but some will have more like metaphorical voices in their head, as represented by the discourse, and just be like looking for things that aren't that aren't good. But I'm not saying that to say that like any negative criticism isn't warranted. Like I have my own negative criticisms of this game. But I do think that this is just such a fascinating case of, like, you know, you needing an open mind going into it. Because like the discourse surrounding this particular game has been so overtly negative.
Very discoursey.
It's been so discoursey. The most discoursey game of the year, you could say. So it does feel as I think you said before, Sputnik, as well, that it feels almost validating that the game turned out the way it did, because you just want to tell those people, like, you know, fuck off.
My favorite thing about all this discourse is that, like, half the people have self-admitted to have never played the original game.
Yeah.
Like, what are you even talking about then? What's the problem?
Yes, but I know you are Silent Hill's strongest soldier. So how
Silent Hill simp right here.
So like how did you deal with the discourse over basically the 2 years leading up to it? What was your, like, did you have like an evolution of what you were thinking, and then you're like bouncing back against, like, you know, the of the world and
I thought we weren't going to mention him by name.
Are we gonna bleep that out like you said a swear? That's absolutely
all I'll say is that I'm glad that he liked the game. I'm glad he liked it. But the worst that it ever got for me was probably after the combat trailer, where I was like, because I made a video like talking about that trailer after it released, and I was like, it's not great, but, you know, there's no release date on it. It's probably not coming out for like at least another year. They have enough time to fix everything. And I think that was Omega Cope, because that trailer is not good. It's a bad trailer. But like that was the worst it ever got. I think that like the trailer that came out after one was the one where they showed off Angela for the first time. Yes. And like that started the real discourse, in my opinion, because, like, you know, say what you will about like whatever Bloober Team would do to the game itself, like the vitriolic discourse I think started with the reveal of Angela. And like in my opinion, the worst you could ever say about that trailer with her specifically is that one shot didn't look great compared to everything else. It was like it looked not fully rendered or something. That was the worst I think that you could say about it. So when all the actual vitriolic discourse started, I was like engaging with it for like a second, like being like, what is your problem? But then I slowly was like, okay, there's no reaching these people. I'm just backing off, and I think it looks good. I'm just going to wait for it to come out, and I'm better for that. Mentally and emotionally.
Yeah. And I think there was some weird discourse, honestly, about the appearance of, I mean, and I don't feel the need. We need to get really into it, but the appearance of female characters in the game got a little weird. Particularly, sometimes I would see tweets about Angela and how she looked and things like that, and then it comes out like her face model it's the voice actor. The voice actor's face.
Yeah.
If you look at the voice actor, it's Angela. It's
that's her.
So
that's the thing that drives me insane too. It's like, complain about the old voice or the old character models. It's like they're just like renders of fictional people, but those are literal people in the remake that you're like calling ugly. That's insane.
It's lunacy. So this is breaking news.
Oh
no. The Silent Hill subreddit. This just got posted a couple hours ago. The photos, the puzzle behind the photos,
right?
It's been solved.
Interesting.
The message, when you solve it, and this might play into some discussion as to why it's a meta remake, and this is the first time you guys are hearing it, right? You all are hearing this for the first time?
Yeah, I have no idea.
The solution, if you count things within each photo, example, the open windows in photo 1 equals 6, then count the number across the writing on each one, you will get a letter. It spells out, after all the photos, you've been here for 2 decades.
Right.
Which kind of leans into the loop theory, doesn't it?
That's really interesting. I have a grievance with the loop theory. I want to get this out of the way.
Okay,
I've
go
never
for it.
liked the.
I
I've
also
never
have a
liked
grievance
the
with
loop theory,
but you go first.
But to say I've never liked it is actually disingenuous. I think it's cool. It's not the interpretation I stick with. But the issue that I've always had with the loop theory is the confirmed reality that Laura is real.
Sure.
Because if James is stuck in a loop for 20 years, Laura literally can't be there as a real person. It doesn't make any sense. That's my biggest issue with the loop theory.
Yeah.
And the remake super confirming that sort of bums me out a little bit, but it's fine. It's big whatever.
Yeah, James? Whomever.
Oh, sorry.
Wants to go first.
Pim, you go first.
I think it's just like, again, as like a meta sequel, it is an interesting concept of just like, okay, sure, we have maybe not been playing Silent Hill 2 since 2001, or in my case, 2007. But like James has been stuck there since. Like there's like something kind of interesting about that, I guess, like from a meta perspective, that like this story has lived on for so long and it keeps being replayed by people, like almost in the same way that they made the fact that like they turned the legacy of the Doom franchise into into canon with you being the Doom Slayer, like this eternal force. Like it is kind of similar in that regard, but it also like if you look at it as this like canonical fact that James is gonna leave with Laura only to like go into the fog with his car and then loop back around, that is not very interesting to me, honestly.
Yeah, that's my main like thing, is that like that is cool, but that kind of goes to like my sort of issue with one, like it is padded so much, like this game, to get it, and I think that's just kind of down to. And I'm sure they had this discussion with either with Konami or whatever, but it was a thing of like, well, you can't make a game that is as long as the original Silent Hill 2. Like, I was trying to think of this in regards to, and again, I guess maybe I'll just evoke it now while it's I'm talking about it, but obviously this is the game that kind of only really exists as it does because of the Resident Evil 2 remake. And obviously that's a game where it's like the first time you play it is as long as it is because you're trying to work out the puzzles and whatever. But then it has that nice kind of Capcom thing to it of, well, now you get to do the adventure again as somebody else, but also we're going to give you all these weapons, so if you want to speed run it, you can do that, which I think this obviously has a bit of as well. But for the most part, they don't want to kind of extend the length longer than it has to be, and those games can be pretty quick when you, like, Resident Evil 7 especially, is only about 3 or 4 hours if you want to, like, replay it from the start.
Yeah.
This And again, I'm sure it's quicker on and I'm sure you can speak to this, Pim, because you're on another playthrough of this at the moment. But like,
I can say this is the case, yeah. But
Yeah,
then
definitely.
again, that's also because I remember some of the puzzle solutions. So it's more about that than you aiming to cut corners necessarily.
Yeah. But that first playthrough is really long, and I don't know if it's too. And it kind of feels like it's that long because it's almost like Bloob's kind of like, we're going to really let you live in this world and kind of soak it in. And it's very different to the first game where, because of that pulled out camera and, you know, kind of how they present the game, you're not really, like, James is kind of like a rat in a cage, for lack of a better term, where there is that sort of distance between you and him. And although you are feeling the atmosphere of being in Silent Hill with him, the traumas are his traumas. They're like, you know, the people that he's interacting with are just between them. You're more of a passive observer to what's happening. You know, like a classic haunted house sort of novel or story. This, because it is a third-person shooter, you are like a parrot on his shoulder throughout the entire thing. And he's humongous. Like, you know, he fills the frame and everything is so much tighter because of that. And the way that they've bulked it out is that, yeah, it feels like all this stuff that used to be fan theory and sort of like kind of more in the margins, they've moved from subtext to text. And I was thinking of that in regards to, and again, I only know of this because somebody on the call had mentioned this, but when Maria speaks about the mystery, you know, when they're in the park and they're talking about the lady in the lake, or the lady on the island,
right?
And how that's kind of part of the resurrection myth. And like, again, that was something that was more sort of left in the margins previously, but the fact that they've sort of ratified that now, as well as ratifying this, is kind of like, I don't know if that entirely improves Silent Hill 2 as a story. It feels kind of more like, by removing that like layer of interpretation and just kind of giving it to players as is, it sort of robbed Silent Hill 2 of what the magic was. If we had decades of people doing analysis on it, and instead now we just have a game that goes, no, we've already done that for you. Here you go. Like, obviously that's my thought on it.
Like, so. No, Jacob Geller, please stop.
I mean, Jacob Geller can't even play this version because he
can't even talk about this version because he worked on it. So
yeah, they put golden handcuffs on him and said no videos about this.
No.
That's how they got him. Yeah. But yeah, I have to say, I think because they do elaborate on some things. For example, that cutscene in the park, and as well as that new cutscene with Angela and James, where which I mentioned in my video as well. I think works well to have Angela even like be aware that Laura is in town. Like those characters never cross paths in the original game, and I think that like trying to elaborate on some of those things, is like the park scene specifically, I think is good because this is maybe a me problem, but as I mentioned in my video, I made a whole section about it. I don't think the multiple endings of the original game work that well because they're just sprung upon you like that. You might like retroactively think about like, okay, yeah, maybe I did not use that many healing items or whatever. But you might not even know that that's the reason why you got this ending. You might only know it because you looked it up online afterwards. Like the first couple of times that I played the original, I first got the Leave ending, then I got the Maria ending, not knowing how I got either of them.
Yeah, I my first time playing the original, I got the water ending.
Yeah, I got the water ending in both versions.
I've beaten the original game like I've beaten the original game, I want to say 9 times, and I've gotten the Leave ending 8 out of 9 times.
Well, that's good. I got the Leave ending on the remake, but I got the remake.
I got the Leave ending on the remake too.
Yeah, but on the original, I got the water ending. It was like, well, I guess he drove his car into the water. What? There's no cutscene really. But
I think that speaks to something of you mentioned in the video, it's just kind of like Silent Hill 2 or like Silent Hill in general, like isn't Resident Evil is the kind of thing where you would have gimmicky different endings by playing as different characters or whatever.
Yes.
Whereas Silent Hill 2 is a story with a definitive middle, beginning and end. Like it is it is analyzing a character that you are playing as, and if anything, there should be some kind of definitive solution to that. So the fact that it does kind of it becomes choose your own adventure at the end is very odd. But again, and that goes back to kind of my sort of feeling like, oh, is Silent Hill 2 not as good as people have been saying it is for so many years? That's the original game. Like they pick something up and again, like it almost raises the question of, well, why didn't you choose, like, especially if you're now ratifying fan theories and stuff, why didn't you just choose one ending to be the Silent Hill 2 remake ending?
I maybe I'm interpreting much more dislike with the multiple ending thing than is actually being said. But I have always loved the way that the original game does the endings, because like it's not like the game psychologically profiles you without you realizing it, and then the ending is just your version of James, and that's the ending that he gets. And whether or not you are understanding what happens, that never bothered me. I actually think that's really, really cool. So I'm actually glad that they kept that. And I think it just kind of, in fact, the in-water ending in the original game to me always made zero sense, because like there is a line in the original game where James specifically says, I would never kill myself. And then they took that out in the remake, and I'm like, thank you. Now we're instantly in better waters. No pun intended.
Hey. Which is funny, because the in-water ending feels like if you had no idea and you played this game, you go, oh, classic Bluebird doing it again. People can't be happy.
Exactly. And that was like one of the main reasons I wanted to make my video in the first place, because that is such a classic Bluebird thing to pull. But people are so occupied beating this dead horse to even deader grounds that they just forget or choose to ignore the things that the original game did. It's
Which I mean, can we hit a controversial point now?
Go for it. Let's dive in. Hit that controversy.
Let's talk about Angela.
Yeah.
I think the remake does a lot to try and improve that character, but she didn't quite work for me in this, which left me going like, oh, is this the game that people have been celebrating for so many years?
Sure.
This is not great.
And I think the remake did a somewhat I will say the remake did a somewhat better job handling Angela.
Yes.
Because in the original, it seemed like they were trying too hard to beat around the bush with fair. Angela. They were trying to be like,
the thing I'll say about
something happened and
daddy issues me.
The thing I'll say about the original as well is the fact of playing that after the remake is one, oh Jesus, this thing's fast. You just fly through the original like
the original does have move at a good clip. But yeah, I think
it also has a bit of the thing of, and again, and I always get pissed off when people do this kind of thing of like, well, Silent Hill 2 original was always shit, and that's why it's good. And one of the things they say is that
that drives me insane.
And one of the things that they say is that the performances that they give, because it's quite like, I think positively it's quite Lynchian, as in everyone's giving these kind of very big sort of, not odd, but it is like everybody's slightly off kilter. And you could argue, well, that's because it's a Japanese team that probably don't speak English, and they thought that those, and like that was the excuse people made for RE1. But in RE1 it works because it's just like, well, that's like people would give performances like that in Roger Corman movies.
That's true. Roger Corman movies were like that.
Corman in Resident Evil, Lynch in Silent Hill.
But then in Silent Hill, like playing the original, and I think it is just because I was coming off the remake, it was kind of a bit like, because less is said, it is like, it leaves kind of more to the imagination, and everybody's kind of a bit off kilter because you can argue, well, who's real and who's not, and Silent Hill and stuff like that. But just in the remake, because there is more to it, because you sit with it longer, I don't know, like it was almost hitting like a bit of a kind of an uncanny valley thing for me.
Yeah.
And Angela was sort of the crux of that for me.
Sure. I could see that. Somebody said, I think this was on might have been on Blue Sky actually. Somebody said in the first scene when you first meet Angela in the remake, it's a very nuanced performance with actors who are giving very good subtextual emotions and hinting at things and stuff like that. And in the original, it is two of the most unhinged people you have ever met talking to each other in the graveyard.
There's people fighting through like early mocap.
Can I just say
trying
that
to fight out of a paper bag?
Can I just say that hearing Angela say "lost" in the remake was one of the wildest experiences of my entire life. Hearing that line delivered without the crazy inflection felt like I was
lost. I love that delivery, by the way. I'm making fun here. I'm making fun, but I love that.
I love it too. But like hearing the remake where she's just like lost, I was like, what is this? Where am I right now?
What's going on?
This is Bizarro world.
It's been 20. It's been a 20-year loop, and Angela's learned nuance.
She's learned to say.
I took an acting class over Zoom.
I like Angela in the remake quite a bit. The only thing I think I'm deeply in the minority here, but I really didn't like the Abstract Daddy boss fight.
No, I hate no. So here's the thing. I thought this would be the big point of disagreement. I played this on. Nobody was in the room for this. This was all on my own. Okay. I absolutely despise what they did with Abstract Daddy in the remake.
Kind of.
It is so indicative of what is wrong with this remake. Sorry.
No. You're good. The Abstract Daddy boss fight, I think mechanically is actually fine. I think it's pretty intense. Like you're constantly running and stuff. Like I'm okay with that. But like the Abstract Daddy boss fight is what I think everyone thought Bloober was going to do with the remake. Like it's so bombastic and overt. When you go like the original fight with the Abstract Daddy, it's in that one tiny room. It's the most disturbing monster with the most tragic character. You get the thrusting pistons. And like Angela says, "Daddy, no," and like that's all you need. That's all you get. You interpret enough from that. And then in the remake, you're going through these hallways. You're going to like these closets that like symbolize probably something really messed up. And then like you're encountering these TVs with her dad like screaming at her, and it's like this is way too much. You can tone this back like 70%.
It is so over egged and like And again, playing that first. Oh God! The moment that I got to that in the original version, it was on the way I described it to somebody was like is when you would go into somebody's house in Earthbound and there was like a funny scene. Like you just walk into a room and she's just cowering in the corner of a room covered in meat and pistons, and the Abstract Daddy's in the corner, and it's almost like you're like what? But that's the thing because it's so odd and off kilter. That fits way more as the tone versus in this where it's. You're running through infinite hallways, and then you get to the end where it becomes it feels like an Evil Within style standard arena third-person shooter thing. I was like,
that I can agree with,
you fucked this up. Like, this is such not the way to do it.
By the way, I watched Northern Lion play the Abstract Daddy boss fight. And world-class yapper, Northern Lion. He just wails. I don't know how he was doing it. He kept firing bullets at Abstract Daddy, and the chat is like, you just need to run from him. And he's like, all right, well, I'll just run. And he gets into the little arena, and it's just a loop of him hitting him with the pipe, dodging, hit with the pipe. Dodge, hit with the pipe, dodge, hit with the pipe.
To be fair, that was basically the original.
It just goes on for like 3 minutes, and I was just like, he's built different.
I will say, though, because I'd be interested in hearing Pim's opinion on this, but there's one thing that I will at least give Abstract Daddy to an extent in the remake is that I'm glad they don't make him a recurring enemy in the hotel.
Yeah.
That seemed like such a weird thing.
I'm glad you brought that up,
Because again, like the cool thing about Silent Hill 2 is that it feels like people's traumas and sort of nightmares are intersecting with one another, and it's almost like you walk out of James's and I know people have said that, the Abstract Daddy is both Angela's trauma, but it's also Mary on the bed combined, and it's like, that's not I don't
diminishes Angela's experience.
Exactly. I find it more interesting that essentially Silent Hill 2 can be different to everybody. And like, even Angela says that at the end of, it's always looked like this for me. And again, it makes an interesting point of James of just kind of like, and it says obviously to the end of the fact that he obviously, what he does to Mary, but he almost is kind of like an invader in other people's lives but just this kind of weird, passive oddball watching stuff happen and then sometimes getting it. I mean, the Eddie boss fight is so much that as well, but yeah, that's the change to abstract that I like. Sorry, I've said so much. Pim, please go ahead.
I have to say that I think I absolutely see what you're saying about the abstract daddy fight being sort of what people feared the entire game would be like super explicit and all that. But personally, I think this moment kind of earns it because we haven't really had a moment that is this bombastic beforehand. And as I mentioned in my video as well, I think it very much sells like the gravity of how horrible Angela's experience has been in this town, because when you enter the boss fight in the original game, again, I totally agree with what you're all saying about like this confined space being like such an interesting choice. And I do like that fight as well. But there's something about that depiction of it where it's just you. It's more from James's perspective in the original, I would say, because you're just entering this room and it's well, what's happening here? But in the remake, you're really put into the mindset of Angela because you see the abstract daddy as just as much of a threat that she does, because it is this force of nature breaking through walls, completely ignoring her sense of privacy by the bashing of walls. So I think it is very explosive compared to anything else in the game, to the point that like even if you dislike this boss fight, I think a lot of people will probably see that as one of the most memorable parts of the remake. I think it works. Specifically,
I will give it this, like, in regards to like the imagination, like in regards to like if this was a new Silent Hill game, like again, it's very kind of like Control when you go through the tobacco maze. Like that's just something that you completely are thrown by, and like you're sort of surprised by, like, oh my god, I can't believe that this happened. Whereas
take control.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, no, I think you do make a good point of just like, it's almost like the abstract daddy is as huge to you now as he is obviously to Angela, but. Yeah, I don't know. It was just something about it, like of initially doing that fight where it was just kind of like.
Yeah,
I buy that. Absolutely.
I could definitely buy that. I think I do agree, though, that in the original, it was a mistake to have Abstract Daddy appear again as a regular enemy in the hotel. Like, this doesn't make sense. So, like, why are we getting Abstract Daddies just walking up and down the hallway?
What are all these daddies doing here?
that did always come across as like an oversight, maybe on the devs team, but like it gave me like an interesting theory that like maybe the abstract daddy is never what Angela was seeing, but it always was what James was seeing, and like it gave me this interpretation that James was maybe very abusive to Mary. But like, especially in the remake, that's like, that's basically Axe, and I'm okay with that. But like, the abstract daddy appearing in the hotel always like gave credence to like that being a possibility, which I was kind of okay with. But mechanically, it's I'm glad that they're gone. Those things in the hotel are a nightmare.
I will actually say as well something of when you play the remake first and then go back to the original. When they introduced Pyramid Head for the first time in the remake, I was kind of like, oh, this is subtle. Like, they don't want to show too much off. You play it in the original, and it is just like, no fucking nuance. It is literally you walk into a room and terrifying shit is happening. Like, oh, wow. They toned this down quite a bit, which, you know what? Fair enough. I'm not gonna hold them to the course of that. I think they had to do what they had to do with that. So the way Angela always sees the world in her time in Silent Hill is covered in fire.
Covered in fire. And the flip side is true for Eddie, of course, and they make that a little bit more more explicit in the remake, I think, with him eating. This is. Don't even.
This upset me.
I don't get this choice. They just made it worse.
So,
they just made it worse.
So instead of eating pizza in a bowling alley, he is eating melted ice cream by hand, by perfidious hand, just sloppily into his mouth. Except he's breathing. His breath is frosted, like he's breathing out the steam as if he is cold. But the ice cream is so it's like what if we don't change anything about Eddie, and then also subtext is for cowards.
I will say, now that you've confirmed the time loop theory, I guess it makes a bit more sense. But one question I was going to ask, which is kind of like, because something that I at least liked about the RE2 remake was that they didn't update the time it took place in. They tried to ground it in the mid-90s as much as possible, to the extent of they commissioned a grunge track for the credits, like which is cute. Right. Like what a funny little detail with that. This is with this where it's like, did Konami tell them nobody goes to Bullaramas anymore? It has to be something that people. And again, like I think changing it to a theater, I think is also boring because of like speaking to, of course Bluebird would do this, but then I don't know whose decision this was, but you walk past the movie posters and it's like knocking you on the head with a hammer going, do you get it? Where all the movie posters are like, Alone, fake reality, artificial sky,
what was the
kind of
there was like a sequel to like a Twilight Zone episode that was that was one of the movie posters. I can't remember what it was. Disappearance at Blue Creek or something like that.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Vaguely familiar, yeah.
Return to Owl Creek or something. That was really, I laughed out loud when I saw that.
That is actually you might be thinking of Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge.
Yes,
which became an episode of Twilight
which is which is an old short story.
Spanish film?
No, it's the original is set during the American Civil War. It's about a man who he is like in line to be executed. He thinks he gets away. He is running to find his wife. He gets to see his wife, and in the last shot, he keeps running towards his wife, and she's running towards him, but she never actually gets any closer. Yeah. And then it cuts to the end, and the guy drops from the gallows, and his neck snaps. And basically, the entire movie, the entire short, was the instant in between him starting to drop and him dying. His brain created this entire universe of him getting away and finding his wife.
Oh, Jacob's Ladder, basically.
You can see like Jacob's Ladder would be inspired.
Yeah. But yeah, the Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, I believe the story is really old, and I think the
like the 1800s, but it got adapted into a Twilight Zone episode. It's funny because one of my notes is literally like, because of the change that they had done to RE2 remake.
Yeah, Ambrose Bierce, by the way, was the author of An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, and Ambrose Bierce is definitely he's basically one of the people that kind of feeds into Lovecraft later. Is a guy like Bierce. So
yeah, you see that.
Yeah,
but it's funny because one of the notes that I made was that the fact that they have made this more from the third person shooter perspective is like they did try to remake Jacob's Ladder as John Wick, and which I don't know if it's quite to that extent, but I do feel like
it
does say something about kind of the era that we're in, of just kind of like, because again, this the Alone in the Dark reboot and Alan Wake 2 are all third-person shooters, and it does kind of set a weird precedent of, is this the only way that we can make survival horrors now? Which isn't true, because obviously we had Hollow Body and Crow Country and stuff come out this year, which, did their own perspectives.
And I would say Hollow Body, I really loved Hollow Body, but I also felt like it was like, it's wearing Silent Hill a little too much on its sleeve.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they were kind of going for.
It was like, oh, we're in an apartment building. Like, I played in the demo, but it was like, this feels
too familiar.
I'm fine with it. I was
like, I liked it, but at the same time, I was like, Okay.
And I do, but I think it speaks to obviously people who are like, oh, I couldn't play the original because of like the control. But it's like basically saying I can only eat food in burger form. Like that's the only way that I can consume stuff, which I think is a shame because
valid criticism.
Which I would say like with this is that like, would this remake have been better if it wasn't a third-person shooter? But then you can do the mind casting thing of, well, I can come up with the best game ever in my head because of infinite budget and infinite time. But I don't know if changing it to a third-person shooter like I don't think it was the right call for this. But obviously, give me some dissenting opinions.
I guess I'll never say that one's like the objectively best choice because there's a million things you could do. But I personally think that Silent Hill 2 as an over-the-shoulder survival horror game works, and I'm personally totally fine with it as is. I'm big okay with it.
Yeah, I think it. And keeping in mind that the original was more or less a mix of OTS and fixed camera. It was kind of one of, it's kind of merging those two concepts together, and you had the floating third, like when you were in an area that allowed for a floating third person camera to just track you, it did. So I think it's not as much of a jump, let's say, as Resident Evil going from a fixed to a third person. But that being said, Capcom took a lot of care and dedication going in Resident Evil 2 to actually recreate shots from the original so they would hit you the same way in that over the shoulder format, so that when you turned a hallway, you were suddenly framed up in a way that be like, it kind of spoke to you.
Right.
Yeah. Every frame of painting and all that.
It's an interesting thing because I think that one thing that people have said about the RE remakes is, well, when are they going to redo 1? Because I mean, obviously, you say they already did, like they did on the GameCube, but then I think it's because of obviously 2 onwards they have been using this third person perspective, but it works for 2 onwards because 2 going on from 1 was already an action game. Like Hideki Kamiya came on board and basically said, we can make these games better if we lean more into the kind of the shooting and the positioning and the, and make the survival horror aspect, like, obviously it's still there, but it's mostly in inventory management and item management, but we can tune that down. So I always thought that when those changed to third person, it wasn't really that big of a leap. Like, it was like, no, we kind of already figured it out. And so when it's like, well, how would they remake 1? I mean, on one hand, you could say, well, that's kind of what 7 is, of they're recreating the look of, cinematic camera angles by having this really, really tight FOV first-person game.
Right.
And making it more about really, scary close quarters stuff and, muggling your way forward with puzzle stuff. I think if you had remade that game as a third-person shooter, you would just completely lose that. And it's the one thing I would say is a shame with the Resident Evil games is that it feels like they have now basically accepted for now they got to be third-person shooters to the extent of even 8 has a third-person shooter mode.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed by that change.
I'm so terrified for Resident Evil 9 and all of the wrong reasons. I really like Village, and I'm so scared that 9's going to be a pile of garbage.
Like it feels like they're going to go back to RE6 again, which is like, oh, no thanks.
Please don't. I will say that there is one game that is out there that does play in that Resident Evil and Silent Hill space and still uses the mostly fixed camera. It's an indie game, and the sequel was just announced. Tormented Souls.
Oh, that game rips. The first one,
I haven't played it actually.
It's so good.
Tim, you need to get on some Tormented Souls. Does it have some pointless nudity of the main character? Sure does, but
okay.
Well, she wakes up in the beginning in it's like the bathtub full of ice type trope where somebody would wake up and find their kidney removed. So that's kind of why she doesn't have any clothes on in the okay,
so they're doing Haunting Ground basically.
Yeah,
I think Haunting Ground is a similar type
but instead of kidney, it's her eyeball. So she only has one eye. But either way, it's a really neat survival horror game that really harkens back to that style of mostly fixed camera angles. Now the camera does move, but it moves more in like the way you would see in like a film, where it's like, all right, you're walking through this hallway, and the camera is now, you're not controlling the camera's on a dolly following the character, as opposed to you're repositioning it.
It's really nice.
Yeah,
I think it's pretty clear that it's not just a thing where all of the big survival horror games in the AAA space are trying to replicate Resident Evil 2. I think also it's very much a case of the how do I say this in English? This isn't my first language. They're trying to like homogenize.
Yes,
is that the right word? Like every single game is supposed to be like a third-person action type of deal where the controls. Exactly. Almost every single game is supposed to play basically like a Ubisoft game,
right?
And I think, I mean, certainly the Alone in the Dark remake. I mean, the devs have openly even said that they were inspired by the Resident Evil 2 remake in that case, and certainly. The devs at Bloober Team were influenced by Resident Evil 2 as well, I imagine. But I feel like it's more of an issue, depending on how you look at it, obviously, that AAA video games are now more and more being produced to play almost, I don't want to say identically, because obviously there's standardized, yes. Yeah, whereas in the indie space, you're gonna see a whole lot more of these games that are gonna still flirt with the same kind of nostalgia. For classic survival horror games, but they will actually try to translate the gameplay and or not even translate, just retain the kind of gameplay that you used to play in those older ones. So I think, for better or worse, if there's going to be a new Silent Hill game coming out after this from Bloober Team or otherwise, you're going to be seeing a whole lot more of that kind of gameplay. I don't know if I would expect that from maybe No Code, who are making Silent Hill Townfall, which, I mean, based on the other games that they've made so far, they're not exactly third-person action horror games by any means. So I'm frankly even more interested in that Silent Hill game than any other at this point, just to see what they do with the material. But I feel like that kind of classic gameplay, we're going to see a whole lot more of that from the indie scene and way, way less of it in the AAA space.
Sure. So an interesting thing about the 2 remake is, and I don't know whether if you or any of you noticed this, I was recording some footage of it, and in OBS it tells you what the process name is of the game that you're hooking into. And the thing with Unreal Engine games is that when you hook into the process, it doesn't tell you the name of the game, it tells you the name of the project file that they built it on. And Silent Hill 2 Remake's project name was Silent Hill Prototype. So very obviously what the thing was that Bloober Team, who have already made a lot of Unreal Engine games, and as we said earlier, have very much been like, hey, put us in, coach, we can make a Silent Hill game. Probably just went to Konami and said, look, we made Silent Hill 2 in Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine, we can keep the costs down because it's all middleware. So like all you need to do is get a license for it. And we know that's the case as well because Ascension is built in Unreal Engine. The character models in it are all the quote metahumans, which is their like you can use them to just generate realistic looking. So Konami are probably looking at it from, because obviously they went a no code because they were like, we like what you guys do. Can you do that for Silent Hill? And it's probably a thing of just like, hey, yes, a 2 remake makes perfect sense because your team has their head on straight of like how we're going to do this stuff. But I think it does play more interestingly into, is this the basis of, is this like when they remade Metroid Prime for the Switch to kind of figure out how they're going to make a new Prime game? Like, is the next idea going to be another Silent Hill? And it does make me wonder, like, because obviously a lot of my main quits with this is that it felt like, not that they were hamstrung, but because they adore Silent Hill 2 so much, they didn't want to color outside the lines, like especially with Angela. Eddie, I think, as well, is kind of a thing of, we want to keep it respectful to the original vision of Eddie. Eddie,
Yeah.
who is not a respectful character in
Yeah,
meaningful form.
Meanwhile, I'm like, no, please change Eddie.
Yeah.
Can you make Eddie not Pokey from fucking Earthbound?
And they're like, what if we made him worse? And we're like,
Can I just say quickly?
Go ahead. Let's hear the Eddie defense.
Well, yeah, no, okay. So one of my biggest, so before the game came out, I think 6 months after it was announced, I made a video about like detailing a bunch of things that I thought Bloober could do to improve the original game in the remake. And I believe the third big point was just Eddie. And my biggest issue was that because Angela's character arc, every single time you meet her, it's like a steady progression. Like back to back to back to back, it all makes like cohesive sense. Eddie, you meet him and he's puking, he's scared, he's terrified. The second time you eat him, he's just shoving pizza in his face and he's a goofball and you laugh at him. Big meme. And then the next time you see him, he's a full-on psychopath. And it's like, what happened? But in the remake, I am so like, I am slightly disappointed that they didn't add a scene like they did with Angela. But like at the very least, but at the very least, they made that second scene make so much more cohesive sense with the rest of his story that I'm okay with the Eddie in the remake. I think it makes so much more sense to him as a character, and like there's no weird disconnect or like incoherence with his character anymore. And I'm big fan of that.
It's just wild that Laura hitched a ride with him into town. That bothers me on a wholly different level.
So now
that was in the original too, as well.
I've never, so many people from the original dev team have said Laura's real. I just do not accept that.
Yeah, I was going to say, now that I'm part of the Silent Hill 2 fan community, you can now come up with my own theories. My theory is that Laura is actually the child that James and Mary were going to have before she passed away, and she's haunting. I was going to say, Kevin, the funny thing that I learned from somebody who's a hardcore Silent Hill head was, so have you ever played Silent Hill Homecoming?
No, I've not.
Okay, there's a character in there who's a female cop, and originally the plan was that there was going to be an adult Laura who helps you like during the
oh my god, I forgot.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I had no idea about that.
I'm gonna say I'm kind of glad they didn't, because that is very, and again, like I think that's the thing that kind of would suck if they did another Silent Hill game of like if it becomes the Force Awakens of just because I'm not saying the third one is that, but obviously it's Heather Mason and it's the daughter from. Well, it's the kind of composite daughter that happens at the end of the first game.
Right.
But then the fourth one does something completely different, but the fourth one didn't sell any copies, so it's kind of like, oh shit, what do we do now? And so all the Western developed ones like Homecoming and Downpour is like, oh, the triangle head guy, he's back. Oh, what's this about? Or like with Shattered Memories, where it's like a remake of one where they have stapled in bits of 2 and 3. And it's like, but what... can we not do something different kind of thing?
Yeah. And that's in that end, that's I guess that's probably why I am excited to see what no code does. Especially with like the fact that they are very it's almost like they're FMV pilled a little bit,
Yes,
I'm okay with that.
Certainly.
I'd like to see some of that folded in. Just give me some good spooks like Stories Untold, and I'll be happy.
Townfall is in a weird. Oh,
sorry. Go ahead. No,
I'll make it really quick. Townfall's in a really weird kind of like main entry, but still like also kind of like a spinoff at the same time. That's the vibe I get from everything they've ever said about it. So I hold out hope that is the one that is a fixed camera game, and then F is just another over the shoulder.
F, F is like the nearest thing I could probably think of is like, is it going to be like Fatal Frame? Because it's like, Japanese village with schoolgirls in it. Oh, what's the only horror game that does that? Fatal Frame. There we go. It's going to be like Fatal Frame. And no, I was going to say something you mentioned in your video, Pim, that I just think of all the time, which is just the fact that you go out on a foggy day and everybody says the same thing of, oh, it's like I'm in Silent Hill. It is like, it's funny that this is the franchise that has seemed to have squandered so many opportunities, and yet it is still instantly iconic of like, you think of fog, you think of like, the elements of 2 and 1, and you always think of Silent Hill. And it does show me that like Konami just doesn't know, like, you could just make a new Silent Hill game. Like 2 is like 1, but with a different character. Well, that's a bit reductionist, but you get what I mean of like 2 is obviously playing in the same sandbox of 1. And then the idea is with like every single one afterwards is that the cult influence grows enough that a Silent Hill could be anywhere. To the extent of like when Kojima says that his PT demo was called Silent Hill, and then the S appears as Silent Hill, as you go, oh, so the idea is that like Silent Hill could be anywhere in America, kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's like Springfield.
Yeah,
exactly.
And that's also I made my second ever video on my current channel. I'm saying that as if it's gonna be another one after this one. No, but the second ever video I made on the Pim's Crypt channel was actually about because this was before the remake of 2 was even announced, and the Silent Hill transmission wasn't even a thing.
Sure.
And I suggested that the way this franchise could have been saved would have been to make it more of like an anthology thing, where you change the time period, the location, and all that, and then the transmission happened back in, what was it, 2 years ago or 3?
And October 2022. Still remember it like it's yesterday.
Goddamn. Time dilation. I don't even know where I am right now. But when that transmission was aired and I got to see F specifically, I was like, okay, they're doing it. Yeah. They're actually doing it. Like they're taking the potential of this franchise and expanding it, because it's bloody difficult to have an entire franchise take place in the exact same location for multiple sequels. I mean, Castlevania did it, I guess, but it's a completely different type of game. like imagine if the Resident Evil games never left Raccoon City, like that.
Right.
It was no, it was never gonna work. Yeah. And they tried to milk Raccoon City for as long as they could, and it didn't work out. So yeah, I'm very happy about or optimistic about the future of this franchise now, especially given how the remake of 2 turned out.
Yeah.
Cautiously skeptical, as one should always be, I think, but optimistic most of all.
I think, that's sort of my takeaway of this, is that, and I think I kind of agree with everybody, which is like, the 2 remake did what it needed to. Like, it sort of, it stuck the landing for the most part. And I would even say probably even went a little bit further ahead in areas that it needed to. But yeah, my hope is that, like, because if the idea is that Bluebird, you get to do another one, it's not a free remake. I think that would be the least interesting thing in the world. Is that if they?
I really hope it's not.
Yeah.
To me, they have like 2 options.
Eventually,
they Bluebird's got 2 options. They either remake 1 or they make a new game. And
right.
I kind of hope they make a new game, but like at the same time, Bluebird could Bloober it. I don't know. Like
that's
my
worry
all
is
over
that,
town,
especially because very recently they announced, Cronus colon something, whatever that
the new
space game they're doing
is,
and it's like, oh, it's another third-person action survival horror game, huh? Cool. That's and again, like, obviously it felt like Konami was like, well, again, they put together this proto and they were like, sure, you want the job, go ahead. My hope would be that they could actually learn from what, like, the few flaws that are in this remake, and like make a Silent Hill that's completely unburdened from having to make it like 2. From not having to appeal to like the Bob Vids of the world of being like, oh, she's holding the knife at the wrong angle. Her eyebrow isn't turned quite enough. Like, just make something new, but like, don't even feel like you have to. Like, my main takeaways from this was that I wish it was less of an action game. I wish it was a little bit shorter, but like, and also just how they kind of handled Angela and Eddie, and like, again, the stuff that they felt like the gameplay stuff tightened that up, which. Whether Bluebird will or will not, because their gameplay is always kind of the weakest element, whatever. But if they can come up with new characters, come up with 2024 better ideas than characters from a 2001 game,
Sure. Just as a side note, I was looking at the logo for Silent Hill F, and I'm not sure, somebody might have pointed this out, but the way F is written is actually a music notation of forte.
Yeah.
Which just means loud.
On that note, actually, real quick, I heard this proposed to me once, like right after the original transmission, and it stuck with me because in Old English, that F is also used as a soft S, which makes it a potential like Silent Hills if you want to be very like conspiratorial about it.
And then, oh my God, that's Hideo Kojima's music.
The little girl takes her mask off and she was Norman Reedus all along.
We get Jim Ross back just to announce Hideo Kojima coming in with the steel chair.
Just out of curiosity about the remake, what was everybody's opinion, just generally speaking, about like the combat?
I didn't like
generally speaking.
You didn't like the combat?
No.
It was fine. It took me a little bit to get used to. I actually appreciate the fact that, unlike Resident Evil, so Leon, for example, in Resident Evil 2 and 4, when he lines up a shot, like the reticle is like wide, but if you just wait a second, it'll snap tight and it will be like dead center. Like,
yeah,
he has it lined up because he's a professional. Whereas when you, oh no, we lost James.
Uh-oh.
And Pim and James.
Oh, James says, please keep talking. I'll be right back.
Oh. It's just funny because they both like bounced at the same exact time.
Yeah, I saw Pim get up and then I saw the message and I just assumed it was them. And then I look over and then James is gone.
So anyway, we what was I saying? Oh, so yes, the combat for James Sunderland is I like it in that the reticle is always kind of shaky. Like he's a dude that has like maybe he played paintball once, but is not very good and doesn't really have the nerves of steel as some other characters. They're both back simultaneously.
Wow,
I'm so sorry.
Impeccable timing.
But it's just funny because James, you said in your message, please keep talking. I'll be right back. Pim left at the exact same time, so it's just me talking.
I noticed that too.
We co-messaged.
Yeah. I have been needing to go to the bathroom for like an hour.
Literally
my
bladder was going to explode.
I'm just gonna go. I don't want to interrupt the flow here. I'm just gonna
2 seconds.
Well, yeah, no, I just gave my thoughts on James Sunderland's combat experience, and I mentioned that he probably played paintball once, and then was thrown into Silent Hill.
You know, I always think about that in any survival horror game. It's just like, you could always make the joke of, well, he lives in America, of course he knows how to shoot a gun. But then that's assuming that Kevin and Sputnik know how to shoot guns, which would be assumptive. So,
I've fired a gun once or twice, a couple times actually.
Okay. And I have only ever shot targets with a .22 caliber rifle, which
I've done that.
Is not if you know anything about calibers, a .22 is not very much at all. It's not a very strong gun, caliber. So I used to do it in my dad's hunting lodge. He would set up a cardboard box with orange stickers on it and just teach me how to, load it and all that stuff. But that was literally 30 years ago.
No, it's the only thing that when I think
I've only ever watched someone else fire a gun.
Yeah. It's the only thing I think of because obviously, Kevin, you said right at the beginning of the pod that you were more of a Resident Evil guy.
Yeah.
I mean, my first Resident Evil game was 4 when I was like 14 or 15, and it was like changed my life. I was like, oh, greatest game ever made. Resident Evil 4, they're never going to improve on it kind of thing. And I've always liked the game since then. But 7 was the one where I was like activating, was like, no, actually, Capcom seems to be really good at what they do. But the one thing that always pulls me out of 7 is that he gets his hand chopped off and then goes up into the attic and finds a gun and he goes, okay, fine. But like a guy like Ethan doesn't seem, because again, like being able to just point and shoot a gun seems like everyone can do that. But he knows how to eject and then reload the magazine. It's like, no, you would have to be trained to do, well, you'd have to learn how to do something like that. But then every other Resident Evil game before and after that, it's like, well, either the trained police officers or your Leon Kennedy, Or in 8, it's like, well, no, he's actually had to go for combat training because of obviously what happened in 7. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't want to go into Resident Evil too much when I was sort of, and again, I will say this. The reason I didn't like the combat in Remake 2, Silent Hill Remake 2, isn't because it wasn't like the combat in RE2 Remake. Because at the end of the day, Leon Kennedy's a police officer. He's going to be using he's going to be shooting shit. Like, that makes sense to me. My main issue is just how often they make you do the combat, and the combat just wasn't very appealing. Like, when I played the original after the fact that you could just run past stuff and it was just more about, like, it was almost like enemy management with the few tools that you had, I thought made it like, this feels way more fitting of the kind of story that you're telling. And as you say, they do give you millions of bullets, which are useful when you do the few final bosses at the end, which I'll say as well, when I got to the final boss of the remake, I didn't realize that it was like some kind of weird cage spider that Mary was in. And I was like, I did have somebody on the call and I was like, just to ask, this isn't the original, right? This isn't a blue. And they were like, no, this is how the original ends as well. Which was part of my thing of like, oh God, why do people like Silent Hill 2 so much? It's so stupid. This is really stupid and gamey.
I love those kinds of reactions, though. This is why I was looking forward to this talk so much, just to hear like the perspectives of people who've both played the original way back when and who've only played it recently, and comparing it to the remake like this closely in time. I just find it so fascinating to hear those perspectives, because I agree, like that boss fight is. And I'm okay with gamey. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean it's it's not an inherently negative term, but it is a very gamey finale to a game that shouldn't perhaps have had a very gamey finale.
It's like at the end of Arkham Asylum where you fight the buff Joker and you go, the entire game was
right.
And I think as well, and
I was just gonna say the Mary boss fight's like the best fight in the original game. I say that with a million quotations.
It's weird because it's one of those things. I feel like Silent Hill 2, and this is a much broader topic for another day, but it's Silent Hill 2, the type of story that they are telling almost really could have used dialogue where you choose dialogue options.
What, like some kind of maybe a developer that tells tales of some sort?
I'm just saying, like, I feel like the final boss fight with Mary could have been just talking to her, and instead of trying to kill Mary, an incarnation of Mary that's a spider. If you're listening to the audio version of this, Sputnik has been shaking his head so fast he looks like the Jacob's Ladder cover.
On theme.
Tim Robbins is in the room.
Tim Robbins is in the room with us, folks.
But I think that goes back to the fact of what I said right at the beginning of the episode, which is that the only thing I knew about Silent Hill 2 was when the first piece of critical analysis I saw of it was, funnily enough, Yahtze's video on it, where this was in 2011. So it was him saying, like, this 10-year-old game is better than the glut of 360 era grey-brown third-person shooter shit that we have to struggle with now. This is like a masterpiece. But he only talks about it from a story perspective. And like all the Jacob Geller videos and all the videos that have since come only really engage with Silent Hill 2 as this kind of interesting object of like how they're handling the plot and the characters, the stuff like the infinite staircase and so when you don't play the game, you just imagine a version of that in your head where you think of it as this kind of like almost more of a cinematic game or like a Telltale game, weirdly, where there is if there's combat, it's all very reactive. Like, that's the thing. I didn't realize that that combat was a quote active element. I just always assumed it was reactive of James gets chased by Pyramid Head or like he's in a room and he has to defend himself. I didn't realize that like with the enemies, like the body bags or the harlequins that are walking around, you just walk up to them and just like, knocking shit out of them. And it's just like, what I understand of James Sunderland, that doesn't seem like something he would, but then like, that's the thing. You play the remake, you play the original and you go, oh no, this is the game. Like, that is the limit. Well, I don't want to say a limitation because I think that's maybe the interesting thing about Silent Hill is that, hey, we want to tell a more grounded and maybe emotional story than most games, but we still want to be a video game.
Yeah.
And that's the thing of like Silent Hill as this manifestation of people's nightmares of, well, no, we still want to give you a way to fight back and solve puzzles and do all that stuff, you know?
Before you talk, Spud, I just want to say it would be hilarious that if before the Mary boss fight there was like a secret item that you could unlock, and you just like open a locker and there's a pillow in there.
Oh no.
If you want to skip the boss fight, like there's just like
that's a new game.
How do I jump out of this call?
James equips pillow. It's really effective. Anyway, continue, Sputnik.
Literally the worst thing I've heard all day.
How can I follow that?
My God. Kevin, what are you doing?
I want to say two things. I want to say two things. The first was going off of what Kevin said about like talking your way out of Mary or talking your way out of the boss fight. I shook my head no viciously, only to then think I could see that being maybe not like a gameplay element, but if you've earned the in-water ending, maybe you don't fight Mary, because like the fighting Mary in the leave ending makes sense because you're overcoming the guilt and like she's a representation of the guilt by fighting the boss fight. In the Maria ending, you fight Mary because you're over her and you fight her and you kill her and that's it. But in the in-water ending, fighting Mary seems really weird. So I could see maybe the in-water ending, you just have a conversation with Mary and then you die.
Getting the in-water ending after the boss fight as a Bloober team game, you go, Bloober, you fuckers, you did it, you moron. You drop the ball. Like, oh,
you bloobered it up.
You fight a representation of your wife dying and going, well, I'm a bad guy for killing my wife, so obviously I should, I should wrap things up as well, But again, that's the original game, so
yeah, exactly. The second thing is relating back to the weirdness of it being a game, because like Silent Hill 2 is a story. It can, in my opinion, really only defiantly works as a video game, and experiencing it by playing as James Sunderland.
You have to. It's the rat in the cage.
But at the same time, like I don't even think about it as a game. When I think about it, it exists in this weird, uncanny valley of storytelling that I think only it really exists in. It's a very, very bizarre little story, bizarre little game that I love with all of my heart.
I think the reason why we bring up the term gamey in this context is perhaps because, again, it is not an inherently bad word. It's just that I think the word comes up when there's this sort of disconnect. Because I totally agree with you that, like, overall, I think you just immerse yourself in this game, whether it's the original or the remake.
Yeah.
But then there are these moments where you're kind of pulled out of it. For example, with the final boss fight, where it feels just like you're fulfilling an obligation. That like, oh, right, this is a video game. I'm supposed to kill this final boss now. So I guess that's why we start thinking about these terms like gamey as being sort of maybe a negative.
Yeah.
But I have to say that like I really like the combat. I like the it feels odd to say that, like, I think it's satisfying because you're not supposed to go to Silent Hill wanting to fight monsters. Like, fuck yeah, I'm pumped. Let's bash some fucking monsters' heads in. Yeah. But I do think, like, because we talked about this before as well, where in Resident Evil games or even the original Silent Hill 2, you can just sort of try to walk past enemies. And I think that is a good option to have, and you can occasionally do that in the remake as well. I do think that the frequency of the enemy encounters and their absolute like hostility and then their speed and aggression makes for a more hostile environment. Like you feel like this town is actively it's not just like a passive entity that is like, oh, here are some monsters. You can try to bash their heads in, or you can run past them. Like, that's up to you. Welcome to Silent Hill.
The town itself felt way more aggressive in the remake, and that's not even like I'm not saying that like in a negative way. I think with
Yeah, me
all of
neither.
the updated
It's an
mechanics,
interesting
it
change.
worked.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. The only thing I will say is that they needed to take the mannequins and just dial it back just a little bit. Just dial them, just like 10% less mannequin, like around the
I'm
corner.
fine with them too.
I was big okay with the mannequins.
Fine.
It's just like, there's mannequin. I have to do like, here's the thing. In order to actually play them, so if you wanted to play the character, to me, this is just a weird thought I have. To me, it takes you out of playing James Sunderland because in order to deal with the mannequins, you have to start clearing the rooms like Leon Kennedy. Like somebody who knows how to clear a room would play, like, because they're in there. You have to like check the door sides, like, okay, clear. You know what I mean? It's like that's not something James Sunderland would ever like. It would like
again,
occur to.
Picture just for a moment that you are in Silent Hill for an extended period of time. Would you not, after 2 hours, be like, okay, I'm in a new room. I want to make sure there's nothing here with me?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, after 2 hours, I don't want to get
if I
hit
can't
in the
leave,
face
I
with
guess,
with a leg. get double leg punched. Yeah.
I think
I
that's
buy
the-
both arguments, honestly. I can
it goes
see.
back
I can
to-
see. Yeah.
I can't remember who said this, but it was like the majority of people who are fans of Silent Hill 2 actually haven't played it. Of just like,
Yeah.
you think of in the original where he sees like an enemy body bag and he walks over a wall to pick up a piece of rebar and just starts knocking shit out of it. Like, and they redo. And then I remember when that teaser came out for the remake where he's in a house and he finds the radio for the first time. Then the enemy comes through the wall and he pulls a piece of like wood, off a window frame and starts knocking. They were like, well, this James Sunderland wouldn't do this. This isn't very, within. And it's like, well, no, like, if anything, this is more contextualized than it ever was in the original. But I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, it's in my head, I kind of created this version of Silent Hill 2 based on what people had told me about. And so actually playing it, I was kind of a bit taken aback of like, oh, okay, this is actually what Silent Hill 2 is. And I think, in the weeks since it's now me digesting that and going, no, I can sort of appreciate it even for that. Those oddities kind of add to it more than, because again, I don't think the original plays badly. I think it still looks good and whatever like that. It is just more kind of like, and the remake as well, I think, will it be a thing in a few years' time that people will look back on the remake with those same kind of like, well, that's what games were like at the time? Because as we were saying about the RE2 remake and stuff, of then kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. Is that what it was? Is that just where games were between 2017 and 2024? In that style of game.
I would like to think so. I would like to think so, just because like I've gone out of my way to like find people playing the remake for the first time that have never touched Silent Hill 2 before, and I've seen plenty of people being like really touched by that by the end of the game, and I think that like that it makes it very likely that I think it'll be maybe not as revered as the original, but like revered in years come, because I've seen people like break down in tears at the end of it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely left an impact.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on 2 hours now. So I figured we could do some final thoughts and we'll go in reverse order that we did at the beginning. James, what are your final thoughts on the Silent Hill 2 remake?
I would say after speaking to Spot and Pim and you about it, I'm probably a bit warmer than I was initially. To be honest, I'm certainly warmer than I was when I even pitched doing the I think it is an interesting versus like the Resident Evil remakes where you can see that more consistent through line of you kind of get what Capcom's going for, and if anything, all the stuff that they've been injecting RE7 into, I think has been like perfect across the board. But that is a different podcast for a different time. I think maybe the thing that maybe, and again, like with the remake, that maybe sums it up in a good way is that I think that final vocal performance of Mary during the ending when she reads the letter, I don't think can quite match the original, just where that voice is breaking up. But the visual of the in-water ending where you think it is the car sinking and then it turns out to be the letter, I think is like, oh, that is an example of one visual identity and a new creative kind of vision on that, like elevating something that you had previously. And the game does have a lot of that. I think now that they've made this remake and like, you know, they for all intents and purposes, they've dunked the ball, they got it in, you know, the team had taken home the gold medal. If they do another one, I would hope that they would be more, especially considering their entire portfolio has been, we can do Silent Hill 2. I need to see Bloober do something with the Silent Hill franchise, which is more interesting, especially on the back of, you know, the not Townfall, but the one that the Observer guys are doing, and obviously F seem like such an interesting direction for the series. I need to see that from Bloober rather than them sitting on the laurels, which so far the space game seems like they are doing. So hopefully,
yeah.
Fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah. Sput.
I said basically ever since the remake got announced that if it was a 7 out of 10, I'll be the happiest person alive, because remaking Silent Hill 2 should be impossible. And it turns out it was at least an 8, maybe even a 9. So
Yeah.
good golly God, was I a little happy boy. I think that while there's definitely things about the remake that I'm not super sold on, some of which we touched on in this conversation, I think that there's enough that they updated and added that work significantly. One of the new endings that they did, the Stillness one, which is basically like In Water 2.0, is the best ending of the game, like hands down. If you've not seen it, it's basically the same ending, just tweaked, and it hits so much harder, gives it way more context. It's beautiful. Yeah, Bloober nailed it. I always had faith, but I kind of can't believe it's as good as it is. And my video hopefully will be done soon, and I'll go into conversation about why making the game more fun makes me very weird inside.
Hell yeah. Pim?
Yeah, on the last note, relatable.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, as someone who's followed the discourse surrounding this game up until its release, I am just very glad to have looked at the comment section for my Silent Hill 2 video and see people, like, some takes have not been that good in my comment section, but that's to be expected in a YouTube comment section. But I'm just happy to see, and that's not reflective of the entire internet, obviously, but I'm just glad to see people having, like, calm discussions about disagreements about Silent Hill, but it's not disagreements of like, oh, this is hot garbage and you suck because you think it's good. It's like just people, you know, having rational discussions about like what this remake did and what it didn't do. And I am honestly kind of moved just by that, because there's been so many years, like going all the way back to the years of Twin Perfect, where if you heard the word Silent Hill, there was like, you got these memories of enjoying the games, but also you were like flooded with these negative emotions and takes you've heard from the internet. So there's been like, this well has been poisoned for years, and people have kept drinking from it, and drinking from it and drinking from it. And now finally someone decided it's fucking time to switch out the water or purify it, or whatever you want to use for this clunky metaphor, and feels like maybe there is some hope for this fan base, as well as this franchise. So I'm very glad that we're now sitting here discussing a new Silent Hill game, and it's not just like, you know, the 2-minute hate thing from 1984.
Yeah, we're not just
screaming at
like,
the screen.
if this was Townfall and its trauma, we might be doing that.
Oh, you mean Ascension?
Oh, sorry,
Ascension.
Ascension.
Yeah,
sorry.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, we could absolutely do that, but that's also one of the things that I'm so happy that we're already so past Ascension. Like, Ascension was, from what I've heard, terrible, and we've all kind of moved on from
Everybody has just pretended it really didn't happen. except for the sticker that we have in the Discord that says it's trauma.
Yeah. And let's not forget the Tangomushi video that everyone should watch when it arrives. But Tangomushi is great, by the way. Everyone should watch Tangomushi. But I'm just so happy that we've sort of moved past that and are now able to appreciate a Silent Hill game again. 10 years later, 10 years after PT was put out there and canceled.
Yeah.
We're so back, baby.
We're so
It feels so good. Let's go.
We never left. I echo a lot of what everyone was saying. I liked it. It had some weak spots for me in terms of length, but overall, I liked it. I mean, I loved the original when I played it. The enhanced edition is like, oh, this is a tight little game. This is a brisk little survival horror game. I enjoy this. I could see why I would have liked it way back when. The remake, aside from my stated issues with it, has some really good moments. And I do agree that it is nice to see that the fan base does have some reason for optimism to explore the themes and ideas of this town right here.
Oh yeah, with your 3D printer.
Yeah,
oh my god,
yeah,
that's why we had this. That's why we did this on webcams, just so you could have that reveal.
It's just so I could show that I 3D printed the "Welcome to Silent Hill" sign, and yet I have not gotten around to painting it yet. So, because
I will say though, and one thing that we haven't mentioned about the remake, which does make it a 0 out of 10 in my eyes, which is that at the end when they give you the results screen, it doesn't tell you how fast you were rowing the boat.
I know. I was furious. I couldn't believe that. Of all the things they took out, why
Couldn't
the
believe
boat
it.
timer?
So Pim, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, currently they can find me in Silent Hill. You can find me at Pim's Crypt basically everywhere. I am on Twitter, but more than anything now I use Blue Sky because Twitter is... I can't believe it's worse than it's ever been. It keeps digging that hole, finding new lows along the way. But yeah, on Blue Sky, Twitter, Letterboxd, YouTube, Tumblr, MySpace, fucking LinkedIn, I don't know. Basically everywhere. Patreon, most importantly.
Patreon, most importantly, Patreon.
Yeah, Patreon.
Sputnik, go ahead. Plug your pluggables.
I echo Pim. You can find me basically anywhere. Don't even bother looking me up on Twitter because my tag on Twitter is Sputnik345. Don't know why. You can find me on Blue Sky, Sputnik34, YouTube, not Patreon, maybe soon. Basically anywhere. YouTube, Blue Sky, all the good stuff. Find me there.
Awesome. James.
Also, I want to plug one more thing. Sorry.
Go for it. Go. Plug away.
Just because this is not just self-indulgent. This is because other people were involved with it as well. So in my Silent Hill 2 video, we actually put out an original song based on Silent Hill. And you can find that song. It's called Never Perfect. And it's on Bandcamp under the name Freya Carolina with a K.
That's awesome.
Freya with a J. So check that out.
Were you inspired by Monty doing an original song for his Alan Wake video?
Yes. And I'm not ashamed of admitting that whatsoever. And it's funny too because I've had like the riff for that song. I've had that in the backlog ? I've had that. I wrote that over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Didn't have song, didn't have lyrics. And then I saw Monty's video and I was like, fuck. If I don't do this for my Silent Hill 2 video, I'll never get the chance to do this. I have the perfect riff to work on. Let's just do this. So I reached out to my dear friend Freya Carolina and a more recent friend, Jamie Wallace. And they helped me make this song a reality. So huge thanks to the both of them.
Awesome. James, go ahead.
Sure. I'm going to recommend to watch Pim's video because I as part of my research for before this podcast was also including watching Pim's video, which I enjoyed very much. I will also say please look forward to Spud's video when it comes out, and I'm not saying because I did the thumbnails for both of them. There you go. Creating contests between them, but I'm also a fan of your introspections into stuff as well. But I quite enjoyed your video on Baldur's Gate 3. Yeah,
thank you.
But yeah, I'm James. You can follow me at HotCyder, HotCyder on YouTube. I am on Twitter, but yeah, follow me on Blue Sky. We're having a lot more fun at the moment. Podcasting wise, Bullet Sign might be back soonish. Maybe
hell yeah,
some additional Kevin added to it, and yeah, maybe you might see some more Silent Hill 2 discussion on the channel as well. But
hell yeah,
say on that.
And you can always find Pixel It wherever fine Pixel It podcasts are sold. Go to Instagram, go to Blue Sky, all that stuff. If you go to pixelitpod.com, you get redirected right over to patreon.com/pixelit. $1, $5, $10. $10 gets you shouted out at the end of the episode. To that end, I want to shout out Jesus Loves You, Kyle Seaman, Ruthless Mutter, Middle of Things, Sigma Sal, Chut Beaks, Dummy Thick, and Friendly Friends. Thank you so much for being a friend. And I think that'll do it for tonight's episode. Thank you so much, everybody.
Hey Kevin.
Yeah.
Could we say that we just put the body in the lake? Question mark.
We put the body in the lake.
In Toluca Lake.